This module is on absolute advantage. Recall that Adam Smith lived in Europe during a time of mercantilism, and in that time governments sought to cause gold to flow in their countries so they could wage war with it. Governments intervened heavily. They kept their own populations poor. They discouraged imports. Adam Smith saw all this and wrote about it, trying to demonstrate that it would be better to let countries trade and engage in trade, and in doing so then people would be better off and the governments would be better off. He even gave us a quote that said, "I don't ask the tailor to make his own shoes. The tailor should buy the shoes from the shoemaker." So that's kind of the idea here, and we can set up his argument in a modern form using some assumptions and some numbers. And here are the assumptions. We're going to assume we have a two-country world, France and Germany, and there's only two goods. This just keeps things simple. Those two goods are beer and wine. We know our world is way more complicated than that, but this will keep things simple for our analysis. And if that's true, then unit labor requirements, these numbers that populate this grid here, suggest that for France it takes 5 hours for them to make a unit of beer, but only 1 hour for them to make a unit of wine. And then it's kind of the opposite for Germany. It takes them 4 hours to make a unit of beer and 5 hours to make a unit of wine. So Adam Smith would have told us countries should produce goods in which they have an absolute advantage. So let's calculate that by looking at their labor productivity, this one. And labor productivity asks, how many units of these goods could you make in 1 hour? Okay, so if that's true, then France could make 0.2, right? If it takes them 5 hours to make 1 unit of beer, they can produce 0.2 units of beer in 1 hour, or they can produce 1 unit of wine. And then we look at Germany, and Germany, it takes them 4 hours, so they could make 0.25 units of beer in 1 hour, or they can make 0.2 units of wine in 1 hour. And from there, Adam Smith would have stopped and said, you guys have an absolute advantage in the production of beer, speaking to Germany here, because you can make 0.25 units in 1 hour. You give up less, right? And then for France, you have an absolute advantage in producing wine. You can make 1 unit of wine an hour, while Germany can only make 0.2 units of wine in 1 hour. So you guys are better at making wine. And if all that's true, Adam Smith would have said, here's the absolute advantage for France. They should make wine and then trade it with Germany. And here, this number is bigger than this number. Here's the absolute advantage for Germany. Germany should make beer and trade it with wine. So that would have been how he would have tried to explain why countries should engage in trade, by making the goods in which they have an absolute advantage. The problem with all this comes in when we make a small change, and I'll make that change in blue. All right, let's say that we have this. France, now instead of taking 5 hours to make a unit of beer, it only takes them 3 hours for some reason. And then none of these other numbers change except for this one. This one's no longer any good. This one becomes 0.33. Right? So France can make a third of a unit of beer in an hour, and they can make 1 unit of wine in an hour, where Germany, the numbers are still the same. They can make a quarter unit of beer in an hour, or 0.2 units of wine in an hour. And if this is true, and here's the problem, kind of a head scratcher, was that 0.33 is bigger than 0.25 in this new analysis. So then here, if these are the correct numbers, 3, 1, 4, and 5, then France has an absolute advantage in beer production and wine production. So economists drew this conclusion, particularly David Ricardo, looked at this and said, this doesn't make sense. If a country has an absolute advantage in both units of production, why would they engage in trade at all? Yet they saw countries were engaging in trade. So that made them wonder what caused that. And David Ricardo, which you'll see in the next module, gave us the idea of comparative advantage. He took this idea and built on it a little bit and said, it's not absolute advantage that a country should look to, right? That's what Adam Smith told us. He said, it's not, David Ricardo said, it's not absolute advantage, it's comparative advantage. It's not what uses less resources, it's what has a lower opportunity cost. In the next module, we'll show you that.